The following is a production of Notch 6 Media.
It's the Notch 6 online podcast, episode number 55. In this episode, I tell you about a road trip that's coming up at the end of May that could have some very cool results, and I have a huge announcement about a new project I'm working on. Plus, we'll revisit our interview with Richard Kughn, former owner of Lionel Trains. It's all ahead on this episode of Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast. Notch 6 is the podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, Notch 6 is your home for O-gauge news, events, and interviews. Now here is your host, Derek Thomas.
Welcome in for another episode of Notch 6, brought to you each and every episode by the fine folks at trains.com. That's trainz.com, home of the National Train Model Service Center. Just what is the National Train Model Service Center? Well, the folks at trains.com have an amazing inventory of parts to handle everything from MTH, Lionel, modern, pre-war, post-war, TMCC, legacy, DCS, you name it, they can fix it. They also handle HO and S-gauge repairs as well. That's trains, trainz.com. And when you talk to the folks at Trains, make sure you tell them thank you for sponsoring Notch 6. This is a big episode, and I say that a lot, but I have been patiently waiting to talk about a few of the things that I'm going to talk about today for, it's going on 6 or 7 months now. And finally, today is the day when I get to announce some projects, tell you about some upcoming things, and just finally get to breathe a little bit and get to share some of my excitement with you guys. And one of the reasons I started the show was the chance to share with our fellow enthusiasts in the hobby. And so getting to share what I think is important and special information like this is fun, and it's what makes doing the show worth it. So we're going to kick this off talking about my road trip coming up at the end of May. And what I'm going to tell you today is still, I'm going to call it fluid information, meaning that nothing is set in stone yet, but the trip is definitely going to happen. What's going to come out of that trip and how it's going to relate to Notch 6 is yet to be seen. But I wanted to tell you guys about it anyway, because I think some of you guys are going to get really excited about what's going to happen. A little bit of background information. My first exposure to a mainline steam excursion came in 1992 behind Norfolk and Western 611. And since that time, Norfolk and Western 611 has been my engine. And I know there's a lot of you out there that have an engine, whether it's a real engine, a model train engine. We all have an engine, a favorite engine. And since that time in 1992, 611 has been my engine. And so the last year has been really exciting to watch as the Fire Up 611 campaign has taken place, and to watch this engine slowly come back to life after almost 21 years. And so I made myself a promise that if the engine was ever restored to operating condition, I would be there very shortly after the engine was restored. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So the end of May, on the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th, I will be in Spencer, North Carolina, and Roanoke, Virginia, and we're going to go chase 611 as 611 comes home to Roanoke from Spencer, North Carolina. If that wasn't enough, I'm participating in some events while I'm in Spencer, specifically on the 29th, and that is the Fired Up Photo Charter, which is handled by Jim Wren, who is the editor of Trains magazine. And in the process of getting involved in going on the photo charter, I started talking to Jim and Sherry George and a few other folks who have been actively involved in the restoration project with the Virginia Museum of Transportation. And what transpired out of that is it sounds like we're going to be able to sit down with a lot of the key figures with the Fire Up 611 committee and the project managers when we are down in Spencer, and we're going to bring you some interviews with those folks. I know it's not traditional Notch 6 where it's O-gauge railroading, but for me, this is a neat opportunity to sit and talk with these folks, and you're going to get a nice background on steam railroading and what it takes to bring a mainline steam locomotive into the 21st century and bring it up to spec after sitting for almost 21 years. So that's part of the plan. I don't know if we will be able to push those updates and those shows out while we were in Spencer. I'm going to try. We have a new mobile rig. I guess that's something else that needs to be mentioned. We have a new mobile rig for Notch 6, so when we go to the LCCA convention in Boston this summer, everything should sound a lot better, a lot cleaner, and that's one of the benefits of having a show sponsor, is that I can invest in new equipment and start to upgrade the show as we go. So we will have a new podcasting rig with us. We are going to try and push shows out from Spencer. I don't know if that's going to happen yet, but I'm going to try very, very hard. The other thing is that my time window is going to be very, very tight, and everybody who we are going to talk to for the show is going to be very, very, very busy those 3 days, because those are the 3 days leading up to the run home on the 30th of May, when 611 will return back to Roanoke, Virginia, back to the Virginia Museum of Transportation, and start her third career. So, now, the other thing I want to mention, and this is, again, really fluid at this point. We're hoping it works out, but this would be something that's never been done in O-Gauge before. One of the projects that we are trying to accomplish with our partners and friends over at MTH and Lionel is MTH needs a new sound set for 611. And we are actively working with the Fire Up 611 committee to try and accomplish the recording of that sound set at the end of May when we are in Spencer, North Carolina. If we can work that out and I can be there at the same time, I will actively document the recording process that goes into recording a sound set for an O-Gauge locomotive. And as far as I know, that's never been covered in any magazine or anywhere else before. So we'll hang out with the folks from MTH and Lionel and watch what it takes to record these sound sets that go into your model train locomotives. So that's what's going on with the North Carolina / Virginia trip. So I will be on the road at the end of the month and getting to go visit my locomotive, see it active once again, and I'm like a kid in a candy store, just getting excited for this trip and just excited to see this engine under steam again. Speaking of other big steam locomotives, I actually had a really neat experience this past week. On Mother's Day, was able to catch Norfolk and Western 2156, which is the sole surviving Y6a articulated steam locomotive, as it moved from the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, making its way to the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, Virginia, for a 5-year loan. The engine is being loaned to the VMT in order to fill the slot that 611 will be leaving under the Clater Pavilion. And so it'll be neat to have an A, a J, and a Y all under the same roof again. But anyhow, seeing this giant articulated locomotive get towed by Norfolk Southern at, well, what we call track speed, which was 25 miles an hour, was still a really fascinating sight. My wife and Henry went out with me and saw the whole thing, and it was just really neat to see this engine roll by. The other neat thing is just outside of Lafayette, where we're located here, is there's a nice stretch of road that parallels the Norfolk Southern Main Line, which is the old Wabash, and we were able to actually pace the locomotive for almost 2 miles, and I recorded some of that. I'm going to try and get it posted on notch6.com, and so you can see what it looks like to pace a Norfolk and Western Y6a. And the crazy thing is, I expected it to be completely silent and just kind of roll along, and you'd get the click of the tracks. But what really surprised me is that as the drivers went through their rotations, you actually got a really audible, I'll call it a clank, and you'll just have to see the video to get it. But the engine sounded like it was running, and that was something that really, really surprised me. I expected the engine to be much more quiet being towed than it was, but it was not. And if there was smoke coming out of the firebox and a little bit of steam, you'd almost think the thing was alive while it was moving. So it was really, really cool to see that. And like I said, we'll try and get the video posted at notch6.com. Okay, it's time for what I consider to be really big announcement, and I'm going to try and give you guys as much detail as I can at this point and really kind of explain the scope and the depth of what I'm about to do, and hopefully you guys can follow along and are going to get just as excited about this project as I am. To give you the short version of the project, I am about to embark on the journey of writing a book. And this book is going to be about a place that I never visited. I've never seen it in person except about 3 years ago. I got to see where it used to be located. And for the last almost 2 years now, I've just become completely fascinated by this place. And that place is Madison Hardware. Most of you who follow the show kind of notice there is a theme with the projects I've done the past couple of years, notably the Madison Hardware shirt project and the naming of the poster company becoming the Madison Poster Company. They have just kind of been my tributes to Madison Hardware and what Madison Hardware represents to the hobby and to train enthusiasts around the country. And so how this project kind of got rolling was about midsummer last summer. I called the office of Dick Kughn, who I had already been talking with about the Madison Hardware shirts and getting his permission. And I had casually mentioned to him that it was my understanding that they had photo documented the moving process when they moved Madison Hardware from New York to Detroit in 1989. And he said, yeah, we documented it pretty well. I don't know where everything is stored, but I'll get back to you. And I said, okay, and didn't think too much about it. When I went to Michigan in October to record our interview with Dick for Notch 6, which we'll revisit part of that interview here a little bit later, his secretary came up to me during his birthday celebration that evening and said, by the way, Derek, we have 3 bankers boxes for you that are full of photos from Madison Hardware. Let us know when you can pick them up so you can see them. And at that point, I started to get really excited because Madison Hardware was owned by Lou and Carl Schur. And they were very, very private about letting folks take pictures inside Madison Hardware. And that was in the main store, let alone the warehouses that accompanied Madison Hardware. And so I got really excited at the possibility that, hey, there may actually be some photographs here that no one has ever seen before. So let's fast forward a few more months. We're going to fast forward to, I think it was the week of Christmas of 2014, so about 5 months ago now. I made the drive up halfway and met Al Colas, who picked up the pictures from Kughn Enterprises for me and brought them halfway to me in Indiana. And I open up the trunk of Al's SUV and start looking at these bankers boxes. And I open the bankers boxes and they are stuffed with photo albums that it is Madison Hardware in New York from every conceivable angle. Every nook, every cranny, every corner, every door, every window of Madison Hardware. And it is almost 1,500 photos, 14 to 1,500 photos of the dismantling and the moving process of Madison Hardware. And like I said, this covers every nook and cranny of Madison Hardware, places that I know folks have never seen before. None of these photos, almost none of these photos have been published. About 10 of them were published in an LCCA edition of the Lion Roars right after the store left New York in 1989, early 1990. And so that leaves almost 1,400 unpublished photos of Madison Hardware. And so as I sat there and I thumbed through these, I thought, these are way too good to keep secret anymore and to just have them sit. And so started actively scanning the photos and scan them at a super high resolution, 300 dpi, which, well, it's not super high resolution, but it's high enough that when you put these photos on a computer and you start blowing them up with a mouse and you start looking in the nooks and the crannies of Madison Hardware, you find some really, 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 really interesting tidbits of Lionel history tucked in the corner of Madison Hardware. Beyond that, you get to see what Madison Hardware actually looked like, the good, the bad, the organized, the unorganized, and it just gives a really realistic picture of what Madison Hardware is and was and what it will be remembered as far, far down the road, because Madison Hardware has just kind of gained this aura of being this special hobby shop that if you needed something that was Lionel related, you could get it at Madison Hardware. So anyhow, so from these 1,400 photographs, we've digitized all of them and went back up to Detroit at the middle of April, and I sat down with Dick again, and I started talking about a book. I said, Dick, these are too good to let sit. I think people need to see these. I think people need to appreciate Madison Hardware for what it is. And he was very, very receptive to that. And he said, you know what? If you think you can pull it off, I'll let you do it. And so this is the official announcement for what is being given a working title of the Madison Hardware story. And basically the core of this Madison Hardware book is going to be these 1,400 photographs, and I would say about 300 to 400 of them are worth publishing. But I want to take it a step further than that. I don't want this just to be a photo album, because a lot of these photos are going to need some captions and some history to explain it. We're also actively researching the history of Lou and Carl Schur and how their family came to be in the United States. We've tracked down some relatives who have some stories of what it was like to be related to Lou and Carl. We're turning over the table, so to speak, looking to find information about Madison Hardware. And we are going to make this the most comprehensive Madison Hardware book ever published. So that's the goal. And to kind of give you a rough timetable of what I'm thinking about, and let me put a disclaimer in here. I have never, ever written a book in my life before. I've never even thought about writing a book until this project. But what this boiled down to for me is, I'm afraid if somebody doesn't tell this story, it's not going to get told. One thing I found just in a few months of research is chasing people who have active working knowledge and firsthand knowledge of Madison Hardware has been like chasing a ghost. Those people are becoming few and far between, and the ones that are left, we're actively working on getting interviews and as much information from them as we possibly can. But that all being said, I've never written a book before, so I'm kind of going through a trial by fire, so to speak, as I start the process of figuring out what this book is going to look like. But this is where I want your help. And this is where we're going to start putting the call out to the hobby as a whole. One of the things that I firmly believe makes Madison Hardware special is the fact that it wasn't just the fact of what the store contained, but it was the reasons people went to the store, what they were looking for when they went to the store, their experiences, their impressions with the store, their memories of the store. And so coming from the viewpoint of I never went to Madison Hardware, I didn't set foot in Madison Hardware until I walked in on a visit to New York City 3 years ago, and it's now a 7-Eleven store. So I can say I've gotten a Slurpee from Madison Hardware, but that's about it. And so instead of trying to completely pull together the story on my own, I'm reaching out to you guys, our listeners, our people in the hobby, and I'm asking you to tell me your stories, your Madison Hardware memories. What made Madison Hardware special to you? Did you go into the store at any point in time? Were you there in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even earlier than that? What do you remember about Madison Hardware? And that's part of the story that I want to be told in this book. And so we're going to start pretty much a campaign to reach out to the O-Gauge enthusiasts all across the United States that may have interacted with Madison Hardware and say, what's your story? Tell us, share with us. Help other people understand what made Madison Hardware the special and amazing place that it was. And so, like I said, that's part of the goal here. And so a couple things you can do to help me out. We are currently establishing a couple of different ways that you can get in touch with us. We do have an email address for the book. It's madisonhardwarebook@gmail.com. That's madisonhardwarebook@gmail.com. We are in the process of eventually establishing a dedicated website for the book. In the meantime, you're going to see a new tab at notch6.com that says the Madison Hardware story. If you have a story or have information or anything related to Madison Hardware, even the smallest thing that you think, well, he won't care about that, I want to hear about it. And so there is a new tab at notch6.com called the Madison Hardware story. Contact information is there. And in the meantime, while we set up a dedicated email list and things like that, I would ask that you use that contact information that's located in that tab to get a hold of me, and I will work with you to get your story written down. Even if you're not a writer, even if you don't think what you have to say is significant, please, please, please get a hold of me. You never know what you might have to say and how that might affect the course of this book. So this is not just my story to tell. This is a story that's going to take an entire tribe, so to speak. So those are kind of the first stepping stones to this project as I start to get myself organized. And right now I'm in the research phase and the outlining phase of how we're going to tell this story. Realistically, timetable, I would love to see this project finished sometime in early to mid 2017. I have no idea if that's realistic or not, but we've got all the photos scanned already from Mr. Kughnn's archives, and we do have his permission and his blessing to use and publish these photographs. And like I said, we're actively starting to do research, but the more help I can get, the better off we are. And the other thing I'm going to go out and say is I don't have a publisher for this book. This is completely on my own, and a little nervous because I'm researching the cost of putting a book together, and it's not cheap. And so at this point, that's not anybody's concern. But as we go down the process here, I may reach out to you guys as a community and offer you some incentives that if you can help pitch in and fund the creation of this book, if you think it's a worthwhile project, we will find a way to give back to those who choose to help get this project off the ground in hopefully some significant and meaningful ways. Because like I said, I'm finding out very quickly that publishing a book is not cheap, but I think in order to do it the right way, I'm not willing to sell my soul, so to speak, to a publisher who's going to want to make 101 changes and dumb the story down, whatever they want to do. I feel like this is one that we need to keep in-house. So that's what's happening with the Madison Hardware story. Please get on our email list. You can sign up for our email list on the right side of the page at notch6.com. That's how we're going to start pushing out updates about the book, about everything that's going on at notch6.com and things like that. Eventually, we will split the email list into a dedicated Madison Hardware story list and a Notch 6 list. But until we can get all of that groundwork laid, we're going to have you sign up for our general email list, and we'll start doing it that way. And like I said, I will try and keep you guys well informed of the process of the book as we go. I spent this past weekend doing genealogy research about the Schur family, and have already found out some really cool things about how Lou and Carl's family immigrated into the United States. And like I said, we'll get into that in future updates and things like that. The other topic related to the Madison Hardware story that I needed to let you know about is we too have another run of Madison Hardware shirts now available for ordering. They're available until June 1st. You can find the link to the shirts to order them at madisonposter.com. We are offering a black polo embroidered with the Madison Hardware logo. This was something that was specifically requested by you guys, and so we wanted to follow through on that request. Teespring, who is our supplier, normally doesn't do embroidered shirts. I've been working for almost 2 months now to get them to do a run of embroidered shirts for us that's going to be the same quality that you guys have come to expect out of the other Madison Hardware t-shirts. It's a $35 shirt. I only plan on doing one run of them. You have until June 1st to order them. The link where you can see the polo is at madisonposter.com. So, now that that's all off my chest and you know that I'm actively writing a book, it's going to be a lot to juggle. I've made it a long-term project. I'm just going to do the best I can. And like I said, I am actively asking for your help. You know, if you have something to impart about Madison Hardware, or if you've written a book before and you have experiences that you want to share with me, if you've tips, tricks, anything like that. And I will say this, I've been lucky enough that I've had some great friends and great mentors such as Roger Karp and Bruce Greenberg who have been great at answering my questions, but I can't dogpile on them too and expect them to teach me everything. So if you have experience writing, publishing, anything like that, I would love to hear from you. Again, the email address for the Madison Hardware story is going to be madisonhardwarebook, all one word, at gmail.com, madisonhardwarebook@gmail.com. I could leave the episode there, and I think I will leave it there. I think that's enough information to dogpile on you guys in one show, simply to tell you that I'm excited. But I wanted to wrap this show up by replaying part of my interview with Dick Kughn from last October that talks about the process of buying Madison Hardware. And like I said, I think you'll find it fascinating, and some of this information will be in the book, plus a ton more. But that's where we're going to leave it for now. I'm going to play the interview, and then we're going to get out of here. Expect to hear more from me towards the end of the month as we travel to Spencer. We'll be back in June with a regular show, and we've got great things coming in July as the LCCA goes to Boston for the National Convention. And so before we go to our interview with Dick Kughn about Madison Hardware, here's more information from the Lionel Collectors Club of America about their Boston convention. Like I said, I'll play the interview, and then we're going to get out of here. Until next time, folks, keep it in Notch 6.
The LCCA invites you to attend their 45th annual convention July 20th through the 25th in Danvers, Massachusetts. If you like Lionel Trains, LCCA commemorative products, real trains, and want to tour the Boston area, you won't want to miss this spectacular event. We have great tours scheduled for the whole family to enjoy. Don't delay. Join the club and reserve your spot today.
This is Notch 6, your first source for breaking news and in-depth interviews in the world of O-Gauge.
One of the other things I want to discuss, something that you probably haven't discussed in a long time, is your other big purchase while you were at Lionel, among other things. And that was the purchase of Madison Hardware and taking Madison Hardware and moving it to Detroit. Did you visit Madison often while you were growing into the hobby, or how did you come to find out about Madison?
Well, I knew about Madison, but I'd never really had any reason to go to New York. I knew they had a little storefront. What really happened was through conversation with other train collectors. And that conversation was, Dick, I don't know whether you know much about Madison Hardware, but have you ever thought about going in and talking to Lou and Carl? And I said, no. And they said, well, you should probably do that because they're both getting up in age. And they really were. Mm-hmm. And apparently they wanted to divest themselves of the store before it was too late and it would just hang there in their estate to dispose of it. So I called and I talked to Carl in the store and told him I'd like to come in and talk to him. And he said, well, okay, come on in. Yes, I would like to talk to you about you buying the company. So I said, well, what I really like to do is send one of the guys that works for me in to do an overview and take some pictures of what is there, rather than me coming in and starting to do that myself and work from scratch.
And
So
was that Chuck Liebrock?
Chuck Liebrock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to
That's
make
who
sure.
it was.
I want to make sure I had my guy right.
You had him right.
Good.
And Chuck went in and spent a few days there and came back, and he said, wow, they've got several locations there. They've got the store, they've got warehouse part behind the store and down the basement, and another building down the street that has two big areas in it that has stuff. And he said, Dick, I can't do an inventory on it. I did. I looked in a few of the boxes that I could see. I mean, they were all piled sky high right up to the ceiling, and you couldn't tell what was in them. But he looked at some of them and he said, there is some nice stuff there, and maybe you want to come in and talk to him. And so I called Lou back. He said, yeah, come on in. So my wife and I went in, and we sat down and started talking to him. Carl was not there. He was home. He was not feeling good. His wife, now I'm really tapping my memory, but either she was very ill at that point or had just passed away.
Okay.
So Carl was home, and I talked to Lou about the price, and his price was way too high, and I told him, well, look, I might just as well go back and get on a plane, because you're way out of line with what you're expecting to receive. He said, well, what would you offer? So I offered, gave him a low ball, and he said, no, you know I can't do it that low. So anyway, we bantered back and forth, and each time we came to talking about a number, he'd go to the phone and pick it up and call Carl. He'd come back and he'd say, no, Carl says no. And so we finally arrived at a price, and I called again my banker in Detroit and told him how much money to wire to Carl. And we signed a quick agreement there saying that I had bought everything lock, stock, and barrel, which is what we did. But then we had to figure out how to get it back to Michigan. So we called a cartage company, it was semi-trailer. We spent 2 months hauling that stuff back to Detroit, and the end result was 16 semi-truckloads coming back to Detroit, loaded to the hilt. Wow. That's what was Madison Hardware. Nobody had any idea there'd be stuff like that there.
When did you start to realize the scope of what you had just done, in terms of when did it set in that I've just bought something that has some really significant history to it? Was there a moment that you just went, wow, what did I just get myself into?
Yeah, there was. But that was because I really did not know what I had bought. Okay, I hadn't seen it all. I hadn't evaluated it all. And it took us over a year to unpackage and look at all these big cartons that our team put the stuff in. There was a lot of junk there, but there was some pretty nice stuff too.
Yeah.
So it turned out okay for me, but I didn't know. So yes, there was a long period of waiting and wondering, what have I gotten myself into? But it was a good thing.
Very neat. Now, when you were working with Lou and Carl, was your interaction with them basically then just the negotiation, or did you guys, talk more as you guys started, wrapping up the store? Do you have any favorite stories about either of them, or was it once the deal was signed, you chatted a little bit, but nothing serious?
We did not develop a long-term relationship, no. But we did develop a nice, on the moment, relationship. And we went to lunch one day. Lou took us to lunch at a restaurant or a club or wherever it was. And we ordered our lunch. And Linda and I, my wife, we decided that, well, we'd like a cocktail after all this. And so we told Lou that we'd like one. Oh, well, I don't drink, but I'll have something, but I don't drink liquor. We said, okay, fine. So when the waitress came over, he looked at her and he said, I'm going to have my usual. And boy, he had a brandy.
Ah.
That's a story I'll never forget.
Seems like that fits the personality pretty well from all the other stories that are floating around, but it sounds like it was possible to have a really good working relationships with them. I've always heard they were either hot or cold, and it seems like...
I'll tell you something on that one.
Sure.
People were calling, customers, while I was there, and he'd answer the phone. No, I'm sorry. We're closed. I'm doing inventory. It's going to take me quite a while. Talk to you later. Bye. Click. Well, he wasn't about to tell him he had sold it. That was one. While we were there, a guy came into the store and he saw what he wanted. And he looked at it and asked Lou how much, and Lou gave him the price. And he came back with a counter offer. You know what Lou did? He's never heard this? It happened repeatedly, quite often. You don't like my price, there's the door. Go on home, take your business elsewhere. And he'd push him out the door and send him away.
Well, I think they must have had some idea that they were sitting on some pretty special pieces, and that, over the years they must have kind of figured out that, wait a second, nobody else has this stuff. And so I guess in a way they kind of had the right to do that.
Yeah, I guess so. But he really did not know what they had.
Really?
No, a lot of it had gone out the back door.
Okay.
We found, unfortunately.
Okay.
And he had no idea what was still there and the value of it or the rarity of it. Call it whatever you want.
Sure.
But it was an interesting transaction, and we had an interesting time with it here in Detroit once we got it back.
Yeah, let's move to that for a little bit. You and your team painstakingly, and I mean painstakingly, documented just about every inch of the store in New York when you were packing up and subsequently moving the store. What were your intentions when you brought it back to Detroit? Was your intention to try and recreate the New York store, or did you have your own plans in mind at that point?
At that point, I really did not know, because I did not know what the product was. And no, we did not do an inventory before we shipped it. We were just interested in getting it put together in larger cartons, these shipping cartons, to get it on the trucks and get it back here where we could take it to our new warehouse and start unpacking and taking inventory. Well, the more we got into it, trying to do an inventory, even then was an impossible thing. There was so much stuff. So we just put it up on the shelves, and we said, well, we've got to dispose of it, so we might as well. But let me just break at this moment and say that when we bought Madison Hardware, I also bought all the right title and ownership of the trademark and the name and everything else, so that we could go by their name if we wanted to, which we did.
Sure.
And that's really what happened. And it was a big learning experience for all of us.
Sounds like it.
It was a fun thing. It was a hobby thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you guys sorted out the inventory once you made it back to Detroit, what were some of the interesting and your favorite pieces that you discovered in these 16 semi-loads of inventory, there had to be some pieces that your jaw just dropped and you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea.
A lot of it was duplication of stuff. If you're talking about a one-of-a-kind something, I really don't remember any of those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of train stuff. Oh, we had a lot of factory part bins, just loaded with parts. To take care if somebody needed a widget for their locomotive or a coupler or whatever the case may be, we probably had it there. Mm-hmm. And customers used to come in and wander around with a little basket and go through those parts and pick out what they wanted, come up and say how much, and we'd tell them, and they'd go home with it. Mm-hmm. It was that kind of a situation. Mm-hmm. There were some train boxes, train sets,
sure,
things like that. But nothing of a major spectacular finding. Nothing.
No factory sealed blue comets or anything like that. Was there anything that you just kind of, as they unpack things, that you just saw it and I thought, I'd really just like to have that for my collection? Was there anything, even if it wasn't significant, that just stuck out to you and you thought, this would be really neat to have in my collection? Anything like that?
Well, there could be pieces in here, right? Well, no, we had a train layout down at Madison Hardware, a pretty good sized train layout. And most of that was made up of stuff that came from Madison Hardware.
Okay.
We didn't import any more. We just took what we had.
Okay. Huh. So you guys found a way to make sense, number one, out of all the chaos. And number two, you guys put together a store here in Detroit that was a nice representation and a nice tribute to the original in New York. And that's kind of neat to hear that the layout here in Detroit that was at Madison Hardware was mostly original equipment. That's pretty neat that you guys were able to pull that off.
Yeah, the sign that was on the front of the building in New York, we took that down and brought it back.
Yeah.
And we had this warehouse in downtown Detroit where the fourth floor, the whole floor was Madison Hardware. And there was an elevator to go up, and at the elevator doors on the first floor, we hung and illuminated that huge sign, Madison Hardware.
That sign has become quite an icon in the industry, and the sign was sold in 2001 now, and it resides in a private collection now, I think.
Does it really?
The sign is in a private collection.
Well, I'm happy to hear that.
But you guys didn't just take the sign. You took the front door, the back door, the keys. Yeah. When you guys closed up shop, you guys closed up shop in New York.
Yeah. The front door, had signs on it and the glass and what have you, and we didn't want to disturb any of that. And so you're right, we did.
And the doors are now in a private collection and very well cared for from what I've heard and what I've seen. And so it's got to be neat that even after these items have passed from your hands, that they're in the hands of guys that truly care about the history of Madison Hardware, and the fact that you played a role in safely removing that history and transporting it to a location where there wasn't harm done to it, so to speak. It could have been very easily that the store had just closed and the sign disappeared into oblivion and everything else just gets scattered to the four winds right there in New York.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Notch 6, the only podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. You can find every episode on our website, notch6.com, or on iTunes and Stitcher. We'll see you again soon. Until then, be sure to keep it in Notch 6. The following has been a production of Notch 6 Media and is intended for private use only. This show may not be copied or redistributed without express written consent. This show copyright 2015, all rights reserved.